Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my week two recap of my 31 days of Halloween, where I'm watching a different horror film every single day in the month of October to honor the holiday of Halloween. And this week, I watched quite a few horror films, and I just want to start out right away by getting it right into it so I don't really waste anyone's time. And on Monday, the 8th of October, I watched for the first time The Return of the Living Dead, which is a horror film that came out in 1985. It is not directed by George A. Romero. It is something that is very much inspired by George A. Romero. It is a really great, fun film. I really enjoyed it a lot, and it's a bit of a cult film. It is directed by Dan O'Bannon, who wrote a lot of screenplays for a lot of sci-fi and horror films. He is someone who worked on the Alien film when it came out in the late 1970s, and he really created such a fun and very entertaining film. It's definitely a film you want to watch with friends. It's something that is very much a communal experience. I watched it by myself, so I really didn't get that, but I can understand where that would come from. It is so wonderfully 80s stylized, which I really enjoyed. Everything from the aesthetic, the clothes, the music, just the campiness of it is really awesome. And I really found myself enjoying it a lot. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend getting it on Blu ray if you have to, or watching it any way you can. And what I watched on Tuesday, the 9th, was Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. This is the sixth film in the Halloween franchise, which has gone through a lot of changes over the last couple of years, but this is part of the original run of movies, I guess. And this was actually one I hadn't seen. I had s- I had seen all of the other ones quite a few times, and this one just I always missed. This came out in 1995. It was directed by Joe Chappelle, and this film has quite a history behind it because this film went through a lot of tumultuous times when it came to the making of it. There is a famous producer's cut, which I did watch, but I watched that later on, and I'll probably get into it in my week three recap. But I watched the theatrical cut just to start off, and the theatrical cut is not good. It's not a good movie, really at all. It is a movie that you can tell was played with a lot of script problems, went through a lot of script rewrites. The ending is not really good. The acting is not really good. It is such a plain, run of the mill Halloween film that tried to do some interesting things, but the execution was really bad. The editing and the filmmaking is also like really bad itself. It was not a film I enjoyed at all. The film I gave the film a 2 out of 5 stars. It's really not good. On Wednesday, October 10th, was my first rewatch of all of the films I've been watching, and that was The Conjuring 2, which was directed by James Wan. It this is a very good horror film. Upon rewatching it, I actually appreciated it a lot more. It, of course, stars Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who are reprising their roles of Lorraine and Ed Warren from the first Conjuring film, which was, of course, a big hit. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a Conjuring 3. I know they're doing a bunch of films within the Conjuring universe that are kind of spin offs, but this film I really appreciated for just how refreshing it was to watch a horror film that was actually scary, that actually tried to be scary without being gory, without, using a lot of blood effects or anything like that, but just tried to go for that old fashioned horror with scary sequences, jump scares, which of course are a little overused now in movies. But I thought that this film used it very effectively. And this film, when compared to this first film, is rather different. This film is much more expansive and there are a lot more things going on. And the first time I had watched the film, I thought there was just too much going on. I really couldn't keep up. But the second watch was a lot smoother for me. Um, if you're not familiar with Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, I think they're great actors. I really like what they've done with these characters. I really like what they do in other films as well. And James Wan's directing is really, really good. His directing in horror specifically is really good. He knows how to move the camera. He knows how to edit very effectively. He knows how to build tension. His sound design is really fantastic. And I highly recommend watching the Conjuring films, especially if you're a fan of horror. They're really some of the best stuff that's coming out of mainstream horror right now. If anyone is curious, I gave that film a 4 out of 5 stars. When I initially watched it, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars about 2 years ago. On the 11th, which I believe was that on the 11th of October, I watched Frankenstein Created Women, which is a Hammer horror film from 1967 starring the late Peter Cushing. This is part of the series of Frankenstein films that Hammer did back in the 50s and 60s, and I believe into the 70s as well. Most of them, I think almost all of them, star Peter Cushing as Dr. Frankenstein or some iteration of Dr. Frankenstein. And this film I actually really liked. It played on a lot of interesting themes that I really liked. It was a little more ambitious than I was expecting. The acting is still kind of a little stilted, it's a little dated in certain parts, but I really enjoyed it. I thought Peter Cushing really gave it his all in a lot of those movies, and it was directed by Terrence Fisher, who I thought did a really good job with it. I highly recommend checking this out, but I would actually go back and start from the beginning of the Hammer horror Frankenstein films, because they are all actually connected in some very loose continuity. It's not a tight continuity, so I don't think you have to worry about it, but I just like to watch movies in order. I gave this film a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I was pleasantly surprised by it. And the 12th was a bit of a change of the pace. And on October 12th, there was a bit of a change of pace where I went for a more horror comedy, a kind of lighter film. And that was Life After Beth, which came out in 2014. The film stars Dane DeHaan and Audrey Plaza, as well as John C. Reilly and Molly Shannon. It's an okay film. I remember seeing the previews of it or the trailers of it before it came out a few years ago, and I was interested in it at the time. I liked those actors, and I thought the premise was kind of funny. I thought it was kind of interesting how they were kind of playing on the whole zombie thing where, someone comes back from the dead who you thought was dead, and they're actually a zombie, but they don't really know it. So you have to battle with the idea, like, do I explain to them that they're a zombie? Do I not explain to them that they're a zombie? Because they are my loved one. It's a very interesting kind of human quandary. But the film itself, I thought, was tonally very interesting, and it did a lot, like, within the plot that they really didn't explore too much. I don't want to spoil anything about this or any of these films. I'll just say that I thought it was okay. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up is on October 13th, I watched The Purge Election Year. Um, I this is the third film in the Purge franchise. I believe there's a fourth film now called The First Purge, which is a prequel to all of these other Purge movies. I think there's a TV series now as well. They really milked this franchise for as much as they could, and that was very evident with the third film, where I'm like, okay, it's done now. There's really no more else you can do with this. But when there's money to be made, of course they're going to try to make money, and that's what they're doing now. I like the film for what it is. It's more of an action film than it is a horror film, and I like that they took that premise and kind of went with it, being more action heavy. It really lends itself well to the chaos that happens within the Purge world. I mean, the one night there's going to be all kinds of things happening, and why not there being gunfights in the streets and survival and all that kind of stuff. It's a decent survival movie. It's a film that stars a few actors that you may know, Frank Grillo, especially Elizabeth Mitchell, who was on Lost, and a couple of other small actors that I don't think many will know of. But coincidentally, this film was shot in my state, so they did all the film production here in my state. And I'm watching the film, and I'm like, okay, some of these places look very familiar. I remember when they were shooting this film a few years ago, a lot of people spotted Elizabeth Mitchell around town and stuff like that, and people are genuinely starstruck when it comes to things like that. If you're curious, I gave this film a 3 out of 5 stars. I liked it enough; it was entertaining enough, but the franchise went as far as it could go. I don't know what they're doing with it. So then that brings me up to the 14th, which is my last day of the week. And I thought I would bookend it similarly to the way I bookended the first week. When I bookended it with Insidious, I decided to watch Insidious Chapter 2, which picks up right away after the end of the first film, and also directed by James Wan. Also starring the same actors from the first film in Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne. Coincidentally, I did end up watching two James Wan films in the same week. I didn't intend to do that. Most of these picks are not intentional. They're kind of just, what I'm feeling at the time, what I want to watch at the time, or what I can find to watch at the time. But Insidious Chapter 2, I thought was a pretty good sequel. It definitely builds off the first one and definitely world builds out of the Insidious universe, giving us more of an insight into what is going on within that world. And I thought the film was really good in some parts, but I also thought it really hampered itself in other parts by being almost too expansive to the point where things would get complicated and there'd be a lot of plot lines going on. The first film is very streamlined. It's very similar, oddly enough, to the way The Conjuring and Conjuring 2 work, where the first film is very streamlined and the second film has more plot going on and is very expansive on the first film. I thought that was very interesting. But I really did like the movie itself, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 on Letterbox, but for me, it's more of a 3 and a quarter than out of 5 than it is a straight 3. I very much enjoyed it. I'm curious to see what chapter 3 is all about, because that one's not directed by James Wan. Is it still going to be as good a quality? I'm not quite sure. His direction was still very good in this film as well. Um, I I'm almost afraid to watch chapter 3, because when I watched the Annabelle film that is part of the Conjuring universe, I watched it because it had James Wan's name attached to it, and it was directed by somebody else completely different, and that film was not very good at all. So that has been my week 2 recap of my 31 days of horror. If you like these videos, please check out the other videos on my channel. I hope everyone's October is going very well. If you're a horror movie fan, hope you're watching a lot of horror movies, some new ones, some old ones. I'm trying to watch all new stuff, trying to build out that horror filmography within my, cinematic viewing history. But once again, check out everything I've done, and thanks for watching.